We've got an amazing discussion panel tonight, and we have our newly elected first vice chair, Andrew Ishufu, who will be moderating our panel tonight. And I will let him introduce our amazing guests. So if we can have Andrew Ishufu highlighted, and then I do see in the chat, we've got Rep. Wineberry here in the Zoom. And I'm hoping that Rep. Wineberry, if he can wait until after our panel, and then we will have them update our members before good of the order. That would be ideal. So thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'm really excited about the panel we're going to have today regarding Black History Month, especially how it relates to Seattle and the Washington State, and especially our LD 37. We're supposed to have 4, but as of now, we're going to have 3 amazing panelists. And the first I would like to introduce is Reverend Harriet Walden. She's been a vocal advocate for peace and justice, and in 1990 she founded the Mothers for Police Accountability. She serves and is also the founder of the Family Empowerment Institute in Seattle, where she's leading the efforts on breaking the silence on Black violence. In 1986, she became the first Black woman in Washington State with an optical license. And during that period, she traveled around Washington State to treat the elderly and underserved communities and helping them with their optical needs. She's the author of a book called Pledge of Excellence and various books, and also Mother Against Police Harassment. She's been a vocal person in the relationship between the Black American and African American communities and police accountability. And I'm so honored to have her on our panel today. Welcome, Reverend Walden.
Thank you.
And the next person I would like to introduce is Councilmember Larry Gossett. He was born and raised in Seattle, graduated from the historic Franklin High School, which has produced a lot of great African-American political activists in our area, and also a graduate of University of Washington. While at the University of Washington, around 1968, started the first Black Student Union in Washington State, and is also an original founding member of the Black Panther of Seattle. In 1980, was a chair for the Washington State Rainbow Coalition, a coalition that was created that Jesse Jackson for his presidential campaign in 1984 and also in 1988. The coalition created ways for Black Democrats to run and created way for President Barack Obama to be the first Black and African American president in the United States. For 25 years, he served as a Democrat elected official on the King County Council. And of recent, in November 2021, he was named Alumnus Summa Laude Dignatus by the University of Washington for his lifetime of service to our community. Welcome, Councilmember Gossett.
Thank you.
And finally, I would like to introduce our very own attorney and LD 37. I always say he's the historian and holds on to our values in our district, Alec Stevens. He's an attorney specializing in civil rights law and policy, and serves as a member of the Washington State Bar Board of Governors, and is currently on his 3rd term as a member of the Executive Board of Governors for the Washington State Bar. He's been chair of the personnel committee on there. He's also served on the diversity and civil rights section of the Washington State Bar. He received his law degree from the University of Puget Sound, now Seattle University Law School, and a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Miami, Florida. He's been a civil rights lawyer since his admission to the bar in 1981 and was a national co-director of the Law Student Civil Rights Research Council and national co-chair of the National Lawyers Guild Affirmative Action Anti-Discrimination Committee. In 1981, he began his legal professional career as Northwestern Regional Attorney for the United States Commission on Civil Rights. With the restructuring of the Civil Rights Commission, he served as a Director of Economic Development and Employment of Seattle Urban League in 1985 and began working on contracting opportunities for minority and women's business enterprises at the municipality of Metropolitan Seattle Metro in 1986. Over the next 9 years, he was a MWBE specialist supervisor, liaison officer on the West Point Treatment Plant construction project. In 2014, in late 2014, he retired as a diversity technical advisor to the diversity program office of Sound Transit, where he was initial manager and architect for the diversity programs to provide contracting and employment opportunity for people of color and women, and was also on the negotiating team for the implementation of the Seattle Transit Project Law Agreement. He's been active in civic affairs. He served as a member of the Seattle, the City of Seattle Tax Levy and Oversight Committee, and was the first chair of Seattle Public School Disproportionate Task Force. Having an interest in politics, he has held leadership positions in the Democratic Party politics at the legislative districts, county, and state levels, including 10 years as chair of the State Affirmative Action Committee and 2 terms as the 37th Legislative District Chair from 1999 to 2000 and 2017 to 2018. And as a parishioner of St. Teresa Catholic Church, he's a former member and chair of the Pastoral Council and served as a volunteer speech and debate teacher at the St. Teresa Catholic Academy, and is currently married to Helena Stevens, and they live in Seward Park neighborhood in Southeast Seattle. It's a pleasure to have you on, Attorney Stevens.
Okay.
So we're going to start. So I'm going to start first by saying, what's one thing you need to start your day? So this is a warm-up question, and I will start with Reverend Walden.
Could you repeat the question? What was the question?
What's one thing you need to start your day?
Oh, with prayer, gratitude. Gratitude that you woke up and you're not on the respirator. So gratitude.
Councilmember Gossett.
Almost every evening before I go to bed, I'm reading. And the first thing I do when I wake up is to see how far I got, read a couple pages if I can before I get up for the day, where I can become a little more awoke to start my day.
Thank you. And Mrs. Stevens?
You got.
I have a calendar from the Equal Justice Initiative, which is a calendar of dates and places in terms of the Black struggle in the United States. And I look at that calendar every day as I head upstairs. Sometimes I look at the actual date. Sometimes I just look at the pictures of those who came before us.
Oh, those are very powerful, those who came before us. And so the next question, and this is a very interesting question based on what we saw last year in certain parts of the country, even in our school boards. So, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Larry Gossett. How would you respond to someone who asks the question, should we ban CRT in our schools? How do you feel about the CRT argument today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, brother, it wasn't just last year. Actually, we've had more states in our union and more school boards throughout our states have jumped on the bandwagon that in talking about how horrible it is that there are Black people and other progressives in this country wanting to teach African-American history, particularly when they, start with our founding fathers and before. And at first it was kind of shocking, but as I reflected, when I was a student at the University of Washington, things were very bad then, but actually the response doesn't seem as hostile as the recent, the last 2-year responses to critical race theory. Here's what I mean by that. When we started at the U, we looked at all the history, English, and social studies, sociology classes at the university, and found there was about 600 of them. Not one of them was being taught by an African American, Latino, Native, or Asian faculty member. Not one of them used any book or article that was written by or about non-white people. And I'm including the music department in this, because we got extremely upset about that. So we said this is an institutionally racist environment here at the University of Washington. It's got to change. But within 6 or 7 months, we started making progress with the faculty members and a core group of the students, and getting them to see the need for reforms, significant reforms in the university, and getting them to support our demands of recruiting more Black and other students of color, as well as we became the first university in the country that said we think that more poor whites, because of our class analysis, ought to have an opportunity to attend a public university. We demanded a Black studies that later became ethnic studies, and we demanded an ethnic cultural center to serve the Black or Latino, Asian, Native students that we hope to bring to the university. And even though we had a sit-in where about 120 of us took over the president's office on Malcolm's birthday on May 19th, 1968, we got fairly good report. What's kind of surprising to me is the hostility that particularly conservatives are pushing this idea that no students in this country needs to get any information about the Black experience, and implying that they already get too much when we've never made significant progress at the public school and below level in our country. That shocks me. I raised this point in every speaking engagement I've had on Black history this year, and it's going to be a challenge to turn these attacks around. But we got a lot of progressive people in the 37th district and throughout our community. I'm confident we'll make some progress within in a while. Thank you for the question.
For that, thank you for that. I now go to Reverend Walden.
Well, thank you. I grew up in segregation, so I understand what's going on. And I think people really don't understand. Like I say, I've been here since before the Civil War. We're not immigrants, and then we didn't come to America for, other people come, but we've been here before the Civil War. And I think we need to own that and talk about that piece, okay? Because the people who want to lock us out have not been here since the Civil War, okay? So we have had a continuous presence in America ever since the Civil War. But what we have right now going on is a psychological warfare, and we don't understand it. This is war against us, and it's been going on for 158 years. And until we can recognize it and call it for what it is, it's psychological. I mean, every time we and we don't understand white rage. White rage is the reason why they burn people's houses down. White rage is what burned down Black Wall Street. White rage is what burned down Rosewood, and white rage is all in The Devil in the Grove, by the book about Thurgood Marshall and all of his good work when he went to Florida to take people for people to be legal defense for people who was boys who was charged with rape. So I think if we understood our history and understood it as we understand the Bible, history to me is my Bible. What we have going through right now is a renaissance of the beginning of a civil war. I mean, these people are really fantasizing that they built a country. The country is theirs. And if we don't understand it, this psychological warfare, it's not going away. The courts are set. It took almost 100 years to bring down the Jim Crow signs. And that's why I don't use the word people of color, because the color water fountains, I don't use that word. at all, because it's not part of my history and I'm not going to ever use it. But when you come from where I came from and have a lived experience, never had a white teacher in my life. All my teachers was Black, taught by the late Mary McLeod Methune. So anyway, I come from a different perspective, and I understand, I understand that the fight is against us. Now everybody else is an add-on. The fight is against the Negro, because that's what the Civil War was about. You had a Confederate flag and the white up in the Capitol. It didn't even get there during the Civil War, but it got there then. So I think we need to clearly understand that all of this is, Henry Berry from Mecklenburg County, South Carolina in 1832 said, if we could just extinguish the light of understanding, if we can extinguish the light, so when the light came, that the slave would not see the light, we would be safe, because he would be as a beast in the field. So this is a continuation of making sure that anything about us does not get part of the public dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And then on Attorney Stevens.
Okay, and Alec is just fine, right? Thank you. So first of all, every time I hear critical race theory, okay, first of all, that's something that really came out of law schools, and it's an academic thing.
Yeah.
But here's how I break down critical race theory. Telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And the effort is to not tell the truth.
That's right.
The effort is to continue cognitive dissonance.
That's right.
And our cognitive dissonance is, we are a fair country, we are a just country, we are a righteous country, and everybody can just, if they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, etc., all will be fine, against the lie of slavery and oppression and burning out communities. I mean, the reason for Tulsa, the reason for Redwood, the reason that a number of these communities got burned down, and we don't want to know about that, is because their success would also be against cognitive dissonance. The cognitive dissonance that says we are not worthy. We are of no value. If you think about, I think it was named Stephen King, not the author, but the congressperson who basically propagated that there was no value from holding up European culture as the only viable culture. Now we talk about Black History Month. Well, by the way, and Harriet, I guess I straddle, because I am old enough to have benefited from struggle, young enough to have seen it before that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember being in my schools. I went to Douglas Elementary.
Oh, okay.
A nearby school was Phyllis Wheatley Elementary.
Yes.
A nearby school was Dunbar Elementary.
Yeah.
And we all know who these people were, and we were feeders into Booker T. Washington Jr. Senior High School.
That's right. That's right.
We could not but understand who we were. But here's what Carter G. Woodson said about why we had to have, first of all, it was Black. I remember, Harriet, when it was Black History Week.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a week. But of course, in my all Black elementary school, it was all the time.
Yeah, it was all the time. Yeah.
But here's what he said: if a race has no history, it has no worthwhile tradition. It becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, and it stands in danger of being exterminated.
That's right.
And yes, if they cannot oppress us, then they want to exterminate us.
Exterminate us.
And they're doing a dual part of that.
Right.
So when we can work the fields, work the menial jobs, then we're okay. And when we can't, or there are too many of us,
right,
there is a reason why we have mass incarcerations. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that. And this is a good segue to my next question, and it's going to be for Alec. What are the most dangerous biases you see playing out every day? And how do you see these biases playing out in Seattle area?
Okay. Well, we can talk about Seattle area, but by the way, so if you go to the corner of 50th and Alaska, there is a sign that's been up for the last 2 years, and it says, racism is a pandemic. Okay. And if you think about how people have dealt with the biological pandemic that's going on, the biggest thing is the propagation of ignorance. We want everybody to be ignorant and not aware of what's going on, so that we can tell lies, so that we can sell lies, so that we can tell the benefit of Black History Month and Black history period, and the history of all of the peoples who are not white, is the benefit of rounding out the story. But if you can not round out the story, then you can propagate either on its face, which is where, growing up in the South, that came from. But here, we have nice racism, quiet racism. We have racism that says, well, we hire this person, but I don't know if they really fit in. Or people will initially say, I don't have a racist bone in my body. And then they get their butt in the way. And their butts are all of the reasons then why not. And that continues to go on. So I look at Harriet and Larry, I don't know, but when things were going on last year and the year before, I called it a George Floyd moment and a racial reckoning, but for a moment. And I'm now asking the question, so what came of all of that? And the only thing I can tell you for certain that may be lasting, and I'm not saying it's not important, but besides a holiday, tell me what's staying. Tell me what's lasting. Tell me what the real difference is. Tell me what the real deal is. And the real deal is, let's move on, because we don't want to get down to the real nitty gritty. We want to paper it over, cover it over, and act like everything is everything, and it's not.
Yeah.
Can I, Andrew?
Yes.
I want to respond to Alec. May I?
Yes, you may.
Okay. Because I've had about 5 speaking engagements this year around Black history. And it's still a lot of people out there, and some of them are Negroes that don't understand. Why do you guys always want to talk about race? You already know you're in a country that doesn't pay any attention to race. We just allow people to progress according to their ability. And I had a couple of students at a college a couple of days ago bring out their phones and start. I didn't know with these phones that we could find this information. These 2 students, they apologized to me later, grabbed the phone right after I said the following. One of the reasons that conservatives today are against critical race theory is this thing about our founding fathers and our forefathers. They don't want you to know the truth. And I said that racism began way before 1776, when the Europeans came over here, starting with the Mayflower in 1620. they saw how much land was available. Now there was natives already on the land, but they thought because they had the gun, you know, not the better minds, that they would be.
Uh-oh. You muted.
Oh, I became moody. Okay, I'm sorry. I got to start messing around. Anyway, here's what I said. I said the first 10 of the 12 men who were presidents of the United States of America were all slave owners. They all owned between 600 and 600 slaves while they were president. Every one of their fathers were slave owners. And racism was already imbued in their culture and in their system. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, it didn't occur to them that maybe Black people might be human, because they grew up in their parents' house, and their parents grew up at a time when the idea that Blacks are inferior to whites was ingrained in our system before 1776. And then about 5 minutes later, Andrew, two students raised their hand because they said they both took turns going back and looking at this first 12 presidents, you know, from from Thomas Jefferson to Zachary Taylor. And they said, oh, Mr. Gossett, you're right. I didn't know this stuff is on your phone. They were taking turns looking up Monroe and Madison and all these cats. And they said that was shocking to them. They said, because nobody's ever told them that the founding fathers had those kind of racial attitudes that was so deeply, and that the reason that they had them is because they didn't want, you know, Blacks and other non-whites to be able to more easily assimilate, and it would make it easier for them to exploit the labor of these non-white workers. And we had a healthy conversation, but I did not know that all this information is on our phone, Alec.
Well, I guess it's my turn. So I like to take it way back because I love history.
Okay.
1452, the Catholic Church, Nicholas signed the bull giving Portugal exclusive rights to bring infidels,
And pagans,
pagans, and Seraphim. Seraphim was an old word for Mohammedan. Mohammedan is an old word, and a new word, the modern word is Muslims. So the Catholic Church set the standard for us not to be human. And the Catholic Church said we will be in perpetual. Everybody know what that means. It means forever, perpetual servitude. And so that's where it came from. It didn't come from the Greeks. It didn't come from the Africans because the Greeks actually thought that the Africans at one time was, the land of the burnt-faced people. They stole everything from the Africans, okay? And then they even named some of their goddesses and all that stuff from them, okay? Because they recognized the mighty people who they were. So you have to, in order to slave a people, you have to take their history from them, rewrite their history, and give them something else. Because the mighty Africans was never ever made to be a slave, and we're not. Every time they do something for us yet, and still we rise, and we're going to keep rising because that's who we are. We are the people of the sun. Doesn't matter if we haven't been in Africa 500 years. Doesn't matter because we're still African, okay? Because it is who we are. But more importantly, this is why I say this is psychological warfare, and I want people to get that. And it's been going on for 158 years. I graduated in high school in 1963, 100 years after Lincoln signed the paper. So this war has continued. And Marcus Garvey said propaganda was propaganda. He said the white man was the best propaganda. Said it was. And Marcus Garvey said you got to hit propaganda with propaganda. If not, that propaganda goes down in history as a lie. Propaganda, which is a lie, goes down in history as the truth. Yeah. And so this is where we're at right now. It's no such thing as bias. It's all racism, okay? Every 10 years, they come up with a new word to describe racism. And then they confuse us. That's where the psychological war is, okay? This is the same old-fashioned racism that they were burning out people down south. And Seattle has a town full of progressive racists. They ran Carmen Best out of town, okay? So don't talk to me about progressives, okay? Because on the other end of that progressive, nobody wants the Black children to become equal. I mean, to have parity with white kids. So the far right does it and the far left does it, okay? They don't want our kids to have parity. That's where the psychological warfare is in. Is that for why is there an achievement gap? Because if you change the narrative, if the kids was equal, you have to change the narrative to say that they can learn at the rate of white kids. If our kids wasn't committing a lot of crime right now, and then you couldn't call them criminal and that they're poor and they commit crimes because they're poor. That's the other side. They say, oh, that's okay, it's all right. But it's all about keeping our kids from getting parity, and that's the piece that we need to understand. This is what psychological warfare looks like. See, and that's yeah. So,
And Andrew, I thought it was really helpful when Alec pointed out what happened after George Floyd was murdered. That was the greatest mass white response to racial oppression that I'd ever seen in the United States, because in all 50 states and in about 24 different countries, within a couple of weeks, there were mass demonstrations with hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, Andrew, actually, after the
Hundreds of
verdict,
people out. But let me finish this point now. There's some, Andrew, Alec, but it is true that it was significant, it was helpful, but nothing, you asked us that nothing structural in terms of change or National United Front or Democratic Party United Front has significantly enough come out of that. The only thing that passed in the legislation last year was the $1.2 trillion structural bill. It was good because it had some money in there for poor families, but we got to do a lot, Democrats, Madam Chair, Kerry, we got to do a lot to build issues around which we could build multiracial unity in our community.
Well, you know what? I just have to speak on that because really the Democrats have not had a strong party since LBJ. LBJ understood that in order to move the system, you have to lift people out of poverty. I mean, he had to lift people out of poverty. People don't get out of poverty by themselves. That's why it's a cycle. And he understood that. And one of the things about this, I mean, when Congress, last year, Biden should have been trying to get the Voters' Rights Act. Okay, if Black people can't vote in America, you don't have a democracy. Okay, so in January last year, it should have been only about the voting rights to be able to maintain the Voting Rights Act. Okay, because if you don't vote in America, you don't have a so-called democratic system, and they're coming after us. And that's why the Democrats across the country, they don't understand what it is because they never lived in Jim Crow. They actually think that they could do something to get this. No, you need to be able to change the law so people can vote. And they did not do that. Again, LBJ understood poverty, and he understood what was necessary to relieve Andrew might not know who LBJ was, but he signed off on the Civil Rights Act.
Andrew, is that y'all?
President Lyndon Johnson. He actually knew how to jawbone. Okay, he got it through, and we haven't had that kind of leadership because it's a big tent. Democrats, the Republicans don't have that. They got a small tent, okay, and they got 3 or 4 things that they want to do. So a big tent sometimes is harder to coalesce around the issue, and people didn't understand. Voting Rights Act should have been first.
Thank you so much for
And Andrew, I know we still want to hear from Jesse Wineberry, but can we get a couple of Democrats add to or ask us a couple of questions before we move on to that?
We have time for that.
We do?
Yeah, I was going to say, y'all making me want to do a church dance up in here right now. My legs are just dancing under my desk. So I really appreciate Alec bringing up the George Floyd thing. And I remember I spoke at an LGBTQ BLM march, and one of the first things I said was, this is how I describe Seattle. Seattle people would march for days, but when they go back to their house, nothing changes in their circle. Right. And and I'm like, oh, they are matching. Oh, yeah. There's this match. Oh, there's that match. Nothing changes. And, I remember going to Chopper Chaz, and it was nothing but a modern day would first of all, I didn't see anything that I could relate to as a Black person. But there was something that that you said, and this brings me to a question to you, um, Larry, is what's the importance of having elected representation and combating systemic racism in the political landscape?
If people were to take the tape of this last 42 minutes that we've been talking, just about every issue the three of us brought up has as part of its genesis challenges to policies made by politicians, whether it be at the national, state, or local level, particularly public schools. So unless you see the intersectionality between elected officialdom, politics, and the condition of the African people in this country, it's going to be difficult for you to see, to be wanting to be even wooed into getting involved in grassroots political organizing, because that's the way we make
No, Harriet, I'm gonna go next.
Oh.
I'm gonna go next.
Yeah.
So
Go
let me
right ahead. That's good. I'm good.
let me
That's, no, I just
provide,
started. I mean,
let me
go ahead.
provide this part. Because what we're talking about here, so if you remember, or you may recall, during the Memphis garbage strike,
Yes.
the
Mhm.
workers had a
Said-
sign that said, "I am a man."
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, hold on, I'm gonna take you all the way back. And
Okay.
by the way, as it relates to women, Sojourner Truth has
Yes,
her
ain't I a
great
wo-
discourse, and Ain't I a Woman?
A woman. Mhm.
And what I'm talking, and so what I'm talking about there is the continuous struggle, and I don't, and it's when I look at those who come from the past, and I've not always agreed where they were. So I didn't always agree with Booker T. I didn't always agree with Du Bois, and I didn't always agree with Garvey, and I didn't, but they all had a common frame, and their common frame was, you treat us as our birthright demands,
That's right. That's a
that
human
we
being.
are your equals.
That's right.
We are not your servants, and we are not second class. And so we should be as much involved and engaged in political life,
Right.
as well as in commerce and
That's right.
every other aspect of society.
Right.
To over
Right.
the whole issue is our, I'm not going to call it fair treatment. I'm going to call it equal treatment, equal opportunity, and equal access. Because the other part about that, which we have, I told you about cognitive dissonance. Well, here's another one. Everybody can make it on their own.
Yeah, they do
Got
say
land
that.
grants.
Oh,
Look
I
at the
hear
great-
that. I
Look
hear
at the
that all
great
the time.
pumpkin. Look at the
No,
great.
look at all the new people.
I mean,
that are-
the last, the moron who was, he did not make it on his own.
Yeah.
His daddy gave him a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that we just have to be out there on our own and hide the fact. So I remember, Harriet, when Gore was running against Bradley, and he came here, but he asked a question. He asked a question of the crowd. He said, how do you think people start a business? And he was giving a defense of affirmative action. And some people finally said, well, they go to the bank. And he said, no. He said, no, not for my people. We go to our families. We get the money from our families. He was talking about how money is turned over.
And the white.
Yeah. While we don't have, and all I'm saying is and so it's also to give
generational wealth
of not only props, but just kudos to African Americans who have, in spite of an
That's right.
unequal system, come through that system. And
Right,
and
right.
and
You're
dealt
right
with
about that. You
system.
know, I
But
just
it's,
want to mention House Bill 1918 that actually the governor signed a few years ago, and it kind of stated that
What state? Washington?
no, Washington State. I mean, and it alluded to the fact, and it stated that the state of Washington and Seattle colluded to run Black people out of Seattle. I mean, and so all those was liberals down there. Okay, by the way, who did that too. I mean, so part of the whole plan is, again, this psychological warfare is to move us off the land. Mr. William Gross brought this land in 140 years ago. William Gross did, and
A
so
large
now,
part of the central area, yeah.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it was beginning of the central area where William Gross brought. I mean, and then others, but
Yeah.
but people were redlining here. But there was a colluding that
Yeah.
went on, and it's still going on. It's still going on. I mean, so all of this racism is all over America, and then you got it locally here,
Mhm.
also in the schools and housing. I mean, I've known people who
Yeah.
actually had enough money to buy a house in the central area, and the real estate agent showed them houses out in Federal Way. I mean, so it's all of this other kind of stuff that's still going on, even with people who got money that can actually buy a house here. So I think we have to look at it all together, and it really it's insidious. I mean, and no matter what we do, our best is Alec says, our best is never good enough, because because we reached all the benchmarks. We've gone to Harvard, Yale. We got the best degrees. You got of all of that, and then you got attorneys like yourself and Mr. Lim Howard, and then you had the very best of all. You know, I'm in love with. I mean, you know, Thurgood Marshall. He did us so good. I mean, really and truly.
Yeah.
I mean, he did us so good because he loved us so much.
Yeah.
And this is what has happened by the people who came before us. That's why Black history is important, because these people loved us. I
But
mean,
you know,
Mary
Harriet,
McConnell thing, they loved us. See,
The other
Harry,
Black
Thank you.
people.
when you're talking about that, you know, I am firmly for reparations. But what I'm really firmly for, because before you can get there, you have reconciliation. And this is another part of the whole idea of history,
right?
which is to tell
Yeah.
the story.
The story.
See, the
Yeah.
usual argument against reparations is, and you hear it, why should I have to pay for something that those who came before me did?
And my family was a slave owner,
If you never talk about what that meant, how it was done,
the impact.
if you never talk about people being killed, places being burned out, what was it called? Black Wall Street being destroyed.
The
When we
Tulsa
talk
massacre.
about VA loans or harm loans, the whole idea of intentional racism to put down people. But if you never tell the story, then you can never get to the issue of what were the harms that were committed that need to be addressed.
Thank you.
And you try to move on.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, anyone that knows me, I always like talking. I always say an African proverb, and this is something I tell people why they say African history was never rewritten down, because there's a saying that when you tell someone, they keep telling people, and we hold on to that which is ours. So that's why we were always good in oral stories and everything. And I always tell people, when you start sharing the story, that's when healing begins. But we still have a bit of time, but there's a question I really want to ask Reverend Walden, and this will take us back again to the George Floyd moment. And you're a very huge advocate for the relationship between our community and the police. And I want you to just talk to us about that, especially when we hear things like defund the police, when we hear people saying they're abolitionists. Give us your expertise from a Black person's perspective that has worked with the police, especially in our city of Seattle.
Well, number one, I think we've sort of been talking about reimagining the police and that sort of stuff. But how can you defund? The city charter says that every sector has to have adequate police protection. That's not happening today. Okay, I mean, on May 24th, nobody wanted to defund the police, okay? May 24th, 2020, the city was trying to come from under the consent decree, okay, and had filed in the court. So what has happened is that they threw the baby out with the bathwater. And there's no way that you could ever straighten up anything but that sorting out. They didn't talk to anybody who knew anything about the operations. All this stuff in the police bureau fitted together for a reason. Okay, so now when you move it out of the police department, even to another city agency, they got to have an MOU. I mean, the communications. I mean, they be able to make sure. And then if you want to move domestic violence and all of that to social workers, they will not know if the person has have a restraining order or if there's a warrant. So it fit together, and people didn't understand that because they threw the baby out with the bathwater. And the city council was following the lead of the people. But what they've done is wreck the Seattle Police Department. I mean, you don't have enough officers now. You don't have enough people there to actually do, and look at all the mothers who are crying because nobody's investigating those cases right now. And I want white liberals to be just as concerned about what the police does to us as we do in our community, because nobody's marching now for all the mothers whose children have been killed. And we have to learn how to do both. And our community, we always know how to do one. One is police violence. It is a righteous issue. But how we harm one another in our community, the new movement has to do both. And we got to be willing to call them accountable and work in that system. But we also got to say, hey, stop the violence. I mean, we got to be willing to do that in the public square. And most people are not willing to do that. We're willing to talk about it. We're willing to talk about the mothers who are crying tonight. Some mothers are crying tonight because they didn't get to say goodbye to their children. Their children went to work, went somewhere, did not come home. That's a righteous issue in our community. We need to be concerned about that. We need to be concerned that nobody's called them. Detectives, nobody's called them about their case. I mean, and look at all these people who actually who have not had any help. So I believe mature people have to do both. And okay, that's what I believe. I believe that because you can't wreck the police department when you don't have adequate police, and every city council person violated the city charter. They took an oath for public safety to keep the citizens safe in Seattle. That's what they took an oath for, and that's what we stood for. We only went along the city charter, what the charter said, and we've been, we're the reason why they had the crisis intervention team. But people were talking about crisis before mothers got started. They didn't have a crisis intervention. We brought that to Seattle from Portland. So those kinds of things. So I mean, yeah, granted it was terrible. And all of this is terrible, but look at it now. I mean, it's just as bad on the other side as it was on the other side. So Seattle has to come together. I mean, and that kind of stuff. I mean, I was assaulted downtown with a hate crime. Guy got out of a car and hit me. I mean, I was just crossing the street, but I was a Black woman. And so anyway, there's a lot of problems in Seattle. And I do believe that you got to have some, I mean, even New York City is asking for more people. I mean, because crime is on the uprise. I mean, there's people upset just because of COVID. I mean, people are just angry. I mean, really and truly, the level of patience and stuff that's going on, people just angry. And so violence is going up. And you got a lot of mothers crying in this town. Over 81 Black mothers are crying here in the last 2 years. And we ought to be concerned about that also.
Thank you so much, Alec.
Yeah, just as you asked that question, because I always come back also to respecting us. We pay, like everybody else, for police protection. Crime is real and crime happens. But here's what also happens, which makes this kind of, it stands it on its head. To have police as an invading force, as opposed to a force that helps protect us. So when police don't answer the call in the middle of the night, they don't answer the call because what? We're not worth it. We're not important enough. Crimes against us don't matter at all. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, they matter in all kinds of ways,
Right.
including having the absolute right to be protected and the right to be respected.
Right. I agree.
So I don't want the situation where I call, they show up, they see me,
right,
And they then say, well, I'm a suspect.
Right. Oh,
And
yeah.
the only reason I'm a
Right.
suspect is because of the color of my skin.
That's right. Yeah.
Even though the
Mhm.
other people who are involved, I mean, these are the issues that also have to be addressed. Again,
Okay.
to not be treated as second-class citizens. It's why I want, and Harry, I don't know how you feel, but I want people walking the beat.
Me
I want
too.
people to get to know
right.
our community, to
That's
get
right.
to
That's
know
that's
who's
right.
in
That's
the
right.
community,
That's right.
and not
Oh, I
just
agree.
show up,
Mhm. I agree.
and just take people out
I'll agree.
indiscriminately.
I'll agree.
But
I'll agree.
we deserve as much respect as anybody else, and that's been a major continuous issue. And when we're talking about the moment, by the way, one of my colleagues on the Board of Governors, when the verdict came out against Chauvin, he calls me up and he says, "Oh, it shows that the system is working." And I said to him,
And
"Excuse me,
that's not,
you're giving me this one versus how many for whom the system has not worked, versus how many who have, been falsely accused and long incarcerated, against how many police who have gotten away with what they have done when on its face it's clear they had violated laws." That don't give me this one example and tell me, and again, because the topic is Black History Month. If you go back and if you read King's speech, King's quote, "I have a dream" speech,
Mhm.
by the way, a lot of that speech is his talking about police violence against us.
Mhm. Oh, it's long history.
That's a lot in that speech.
It's long history. Long history. Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. Councilmember Gossett, do you have anything to say on that?
no, I just want to be involved in responding to some of the listeners who are part of the LD 37 responses to what we've said, and have an opportunity to respond to some of them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to go into questions and
Mhm.
from the members, and I see Sunil
A lot of
Agarwal.
hands.
Hello, thank you. I just really appreciate
Can
all
you
the
give your
panelists.
name?
Oh, yes, my name is Sunil Agarwal.
Okay.
We were in an event at Councilmember Gossett a long time ago on incarceration and the drug war. I
Okay.
remember having you, and I just want to thank everybody for speaking so passionately and patiently with us on this topic. I had a question about kind of like what Cornel West and Tavis Smiley and leaders of those kind were saying, about what they called Black misleadership. They started sort of making criticisms when Obama was president. And then later I heard criticisms related to the Congressional Black Caucus leadership, and, who are, very well positioned nationally. And I was just concerned about those things, questions around corporatism or, misleadership. And it just sort of, it reminded me of just some of the issues that I think we should talk about. And then finally, I like the Reverend who said something about the Catholic Church doctrine that justified, servitude for Africans. And it reminded me of the doctrine of discovery. And so that doctrine of discovery, Ruth Bader Ginsburg used to justify some of her decisions around Native American rights. And that's the same kind of doctrine of just conquest. And I was sad when she passed away, but people didn't see that other sort of side of her history of supporting that kind of framework of the US settler colonialism, which also supports slavery systems. So that's what I wanted to sort of raise those kind of twists and see if anybody wants to respond. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Andrew, I would like to respond, if I may. First of all, thank you for putting those questions before us. there's always should be constructive criticism of Black leaders, regardless of who we are, how long we've been in the movement, whether we're men or women, because, you know, criticism is healthy. Sometimes the criticism is not very constructive. You know, you crazy nigga, stop talking. And, you know, that's gonna continue. I don't really, it doesn't really bother me. And I think that we need to encourage our people to raise issues and of things that we say it's not clear to them or they don't agree. I think that that's healthy because there's a tendency of absolute power and dominance to absolutely corrupt people when there's no accountability, no challenge. Look at what's happening with this cat named Donald J. Trump in the Republican Party. Why everything he say, we might get hurt and kicked out of office if we criticize him. I do not want to copy that. And then lastly, we gotta have this kind of criticism, different points of view, if we're gonna be a broad united front. Because if we try to be too doctrinaire that this is the right way for Democratic Party activists to act, no other way counts, and we get the leadership all to buy into that, and all the rest of us are scared to talk to y'all because you're crazy or we don't want to be called Toms. We gotta get away from that if we're gonna build the kind of revolutionary or progressive movement that we really do need to garner mass support in this country, because it's gonna be difficult.
I suggest you listen to a knock at midnight, Martin Luther King. It's about 6 minutes. You talk about what's happening.
Is it what do you mean listen to it? It's
you know, it's on YouTube. And it's part of his sermon. It's called A Knock at Midnight. And he talked about how the criticism that you not only got the death threats from the white community and that, but you got the criticism from the Black people, from the Negroes and stuff like that. Because really he wasn't liked by everybody, and nobody will be liked, but he kept the work going. And so, you know, I mean, we're not a monolithic people. I mean, and I think that's what I think that we're not a monolith, even from the continent. I mean, you know, somebody cooks rice one way and somebody cooks rice another way, but it's all rice. But we're not a monolithic people, and I think that that's where we get into people think.
And Andrew saying amen to that.
You know, and think that we all just try to be alike, but you know, I always thought Tavis and Cornel West had enough money that they could criticize Obama. They could have put up some training centers, and they could have done something else on the other side.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with them raising those criticisms.
Yeah, except that my problem, my issue is what? And then in the 4 years of Donald Trump, where were quiet?
They? That's right.
Where were they?
That's right. That's right.
I mean, have nothing to say. You know, it was that Obama didn't do enough.
Right.
But here's a man trying to undo everything.
Everything. And they were quiet.
By the way, for Black History Month, y'all remember him congratulating Frederick Douglass on the great job he was doing. But I'm really saying that Mr. Smiley and Professor West left me cold.
Me too.
When he gave no withering attack, not even near withering attack on Donald. And you know, I just have to say,
me too.
What's up with that?
Yeah, I could say that. I could tell you that they were behind wearing the white shirts with the black lettering saying "Blacks for Trump." We just still wait till now.
No, those two guys are not for Trump. Cornel West, all between 2016 and 2020, was on CNN a lot criticizing Trump, and you know, maybe that wasn't enough. But no, I think we're making none of us think that, you know, we want to follow the Republican model that nobody criticizes the great leader.
No. Okay.
No, but that criticism started before 45 even got elected. So So we have to own the fact that sometimes we do something sometimes and it's not in integrity, but they do it and it's okay, but we have to own it, that that's how it happened. And
Okay.
not, that's right. I mean,
I-
own that, you know,
I
and then
understand.
they try to move on, see, you know, because we're not a monolithic people, but we're
So,
fabulous.
so I'm gonna, thank you
Okay.
so much. So let me go to Robert Stevens.
Mr. Stevens.
Hi, Robert Stevens, Brother Alex. My question is, can you speak briefly on how the United States municipal police departments began, and also what was the evolution or why they created prison systems in the United States as it relates to the vacancy laws in the 1700s?
Alec.
I'm gonna take a short course on this because I don't know nearly as much as I should. But let's face it, the birth of quote police forces
Yeah.
was really slave catchers,
Yeah.
That's right.
was really organizing
Alec.
people to catch, you know,
The first one.
those who were trying to
Slave catchers.
get out of slavery. And I can't tell you I know much about prison systems, except you know, I think initially they weren't
Prison,
for
that's right.
us, okay? Because
Right.
if you
'Cause we
hear about them,
needed-
they're talking about
they needed us to
reforming
work.
and reformatory, et cetera, et cetera. My brief history tells me we would be lucky if we were jailed or imprisoned. The usual
Before,
course for us was execution on the spot.
Yeah.
So that's what I remember and that's what I understand, but maybe somebody
Right.
else can fill in.
Well,
some-
actually, the prison system was started by the Quakers because they wanted to see if people could be redeemed, because so they could be redeemed or restored. And then it got to be somewhere else. But the system itself was started by the Quakers. And the Northern Quakers did not own slaves, but the Southern Quakers did. And so there was a conflict right there. But the Quakers with William Penn, I think he was one of the founders of the Quaker movement. William Penn, I mean, and he absolutely had a different reality. He believed that man could be redeemed. And so the prison system was actually at one time for redemption. And before integration, the white people filled up prisons, okay? I mean, the influx of Black people in prison was a direct relationship of integration because, again, they didn't want us integrated into the system. I mean, into society. So they made more crimes felonies, okay? Because of misdemeanor, we had the judge on there before talking about misdemeanor. So when they made more crimes felons, then you had more people going to the big house than it would if they would just spend it 10 months downtown in the city jail. And so all of this was part of this war against us. Go back and read the Southern strategy. Everything that's happening right now was part of the Southern strategy. Part of that strategy is when integration came in, 29,000 Black people, Black teachers lost their job, and most of those was men, because the Southern strategy said they would never have Black men teaching white girls in the school, and they wouldn't have Black boys in the classroom. And that's when you came up with special ed. So the Southern strategy is they laid out right after the civil rights movement to be able to take back everything that was given to us, and they're in take back mode now.
But Harriet, by the way, isn't it coming out of the South? A number of Southern states didn't build prisons, but they had us on plantations,
Right.
state-sponsored plantations, state-sponsored chain gangs.
Right, that's right. They pick you
To
up.
do manual labor that
That's
used
right.
to be done by slaves. It became
That's right.
it became a legal way to
That's right.
now have slaves again to do a
Right.
lot of their work.
Right, that's right.
Yeah.
In Florida, they
Well-
picked them up. They picked the oranges in the orange grove. That's why The Devil in the Grove is so important for people to read. If people don't want to teach race theory, it's already in all the Black books. I mean, it's
Well,
already in the
not
books.
in
It's
it, yeah.
already there. Yeah.
Thank
Real
you so
quick.
much.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was gonna ask something real quickly, Andrew, to my two panelists, that it is true that they didn't have a lot of blacks in prison during slavery times because it's too much of a profit in slavery to allow somebody else, the state or somebody, to take a lot of the men away. And they didn't need to do that because they had people that enforced all the codes against enslaved people.
You're on
He said
mute.
mute himself again.
I'd like to refer two books real quickly. Worse Than Slavery and Slavery by Another Name, that documents very effectively the commitment that white America, particularly in the South, made to incarcerating Black men, in particular. About 10% of the women in jail from 1877 to the 1900s were women. But they made a tremendous amount of money by opening it up to white corporations. The plantations that still continue to have free labor, and they were still able to maximize their profit. And the state or the prisons paid the money for all of these people, and not the and the masters in that period of time, 1877 to 1900s, were able to just work us to death for 1, 2, or whatever the sentence was, years. And they had these black codes, laws that were only imposed on blacks, stealing chicken, looking at a white woman the wrong way, and they get 1, 2, and 3 years in jail. And the corporate farmers and industries made tremendous amount of money. Thank you.
So
Oh,
much.
yeah.
So I'm gonna go
And
to
real quickly,
Justin
the other
Bird.
part of that is the fact that after the slaves were freed, they were out in the streets, and the vagrancy law, where they got
Yeah.
picked up
That's
and sent
right.
to
That's
Yeah,
prison.
right.
vagrancy and loitering were two slave codes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
mhm.
Angola is one of the present
Oh yeah.
plantations that
Angola
imprisoned.
and yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Justin.
Andrew, who did you call on?
Justin.
Yes.
Your hand was
Your
up.
hand is up. You have a question?
No, I do apologize. My hand was
Okay.
just flailing. My hand was flailing.
Okay.
So we'll go to Janelle Hicks.
Janelle?
Janelle?
Hello. So
Hello.
my question is, as I was listening to you guys talk about reparations, because I've often thought that it should be called crime victims compensation rather than reparations. And I really believe that, because I think that does away with the argument about, oh, I didn't own slaves, but there still is restitution and crime. We are crime victims. We were kidnapped, we were raped, we had our wages stolen from us, we had our patents stolen from us, we had the federal government conspiring against us to have redlining. Native Americans had land taken. We had crimes of arson committed against us in Black Wall Street and Rosewood. And I have often thought that the argument is improperly framed, and we should be asking for crime victims compensation and going through wage and hour laws and, demanding the back wages and the results of these crimes that were committed against our people, and the loss of inheritance and the loss of home ownership. Like, I don't understand why we are not saying what we are, which are victims of crimes. And everywhere across King County and most counties has some kind of crime victims compensations program. So I think we need to reframe that reparations argument. That I have always thought that. So I just wanted to share that with you guys and see what you guys thought about that.
I think that's a great idea.
I mean, did you,
That still
Andrew?
gets us, that still
Oh,
gets
Alec.
us to, that still gets us to the whole issue of reconciliation. One, if you don't lay it out, okay, then again, somebody's gonna say, no,
That's not true.
there might have been victims, but I wasn't a perpetrator.
Yeah, that's what they
I didn't have anything to do with it. So whether we call it crime victims or whatever we call it, if it is never acknowledged to have happened in the first place, and that it was wrongful in itself, you don't get to either what do you do to what do you get to make the victim whole? You see, you still have to come to a place where you say, oh, there were victims here, because we haven't come to that place. Or what do you do to make this wrong a right? And either way, you know, you've got somehow or another, it's got to be laid out. And like I said, I think the biggest, borrowing your word, crime is the cover-up.
Yeah.
The cover-up is the issue. Getting,
I think so.
overcoming the cover-up, which is these didn't happen. You know, it never happened. And if it did, I had nothing to do with it. And if it did, I'm not benefiting from it. But it's really uncovering all of that, you know, because again, also the cognitive dissonance says, well, those things might have happened, but I didn't benefit from that, which is a whole bunch of hooey.
Yeah. Janelle, I would agree with what Brother Alec just said. We can use, and we'll make sure we continue to use, crime victim compensation, interact, you know, and defining what reparations mean, and we can use them both without having to do it out reparations. What using reparations has meant for a lot of the efforts in recent years has been we are able to tie what Germany did on behalf of the country of Israel and the Jewish people. They gave billions, and they used that money to develop their country, or the 20 to 25,000 Americans gave to Japanese citizens who were unfairly and violently incarcerated during World War II. So we can make it work by using both. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to add something. I know in Africa, in South Africa, and also in Rwanda, we called it the Truth and Reconciliation.
Yeah, like what Alec was talking about.
Yeah, and it made a whole lot of difference. So we're really short of time, so I'm going to have Kelvin and then Carrie, and then we'll round up. So Kevin, your question, please.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad I was able to jump in on this. And just we're talking about Black history, and a lot of the focus, rightfully so, has been on what happened in the South. But I grew up in Philly, and I always called it the segregated North. And I know Dr. King talked about the most fearful he's ever been was walking through Chicago. And of course, Boston has a reputation.
Yes.
And so does New York. That's why you have Queens, Brooklyn, and all that. Yeah, I don't know if folks want to talk about the institutionalized segregation of the North. And, you know, they say a rose by any other name is still the same, but that's true for a turd too. So if you can just, anyone on the panel can talk about that, and how, because this is as far north, parallel to probably Maine or Vermont, and how in our own, well, we know about everything here, but just to talk about the segregation, what it looks like in the Great Northwest or in the Northeast. Thank you.
I'm from the Great Northwest, and I have a specific example to give you all as we are closing out. On November 8th to 10th, 1961, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made his only visit to Seattle at the request of the Reverend Samuel Berry McKinney, the pastor at Mount Zion Baptist Church, the largest Black church in our community at that time. And the reason that he asked him to come out is to help to stimulate an open housing open housing movement, excuse me, in Seattle, Washington, because Reverend McKinney and the Black United Clergy had just learned that Seattle had become, in the fall of '61, and I was a sophomore at Garfield High School then, had become the fifth most segregated city in all of the land. Seattle, Washington, y'all. I'm not talking about some other city. And Martin came, only place to let him speak was Garfield High School. And again, tying the reparations issue together. Temple Hurst Church that had 1,000 seats at that time was the only church willing to allow us to have a people's and community rally during the period of his visit. And then if I can fast forward to today, last year, the FYI guy, Eugene Bulk, the writer for the Seattle Times newspaper, did an article on Black versus white wealth, generational wealth that has been built up over the generations here in Seattle. And he said the average white household in Seattle, Washington has a household wealth worth about $456,000. The average Black wealth in Seattle, Washington was $33,000, the wealth that we've been able to accumulate over the years. And I don't know why he put this next sentence in, but this next sentence had made me angry. Because if it's true, it's really bad. He said, he said 25% of all Black households in Seattle, Washington don't have $5 in the bank.
How does he know that?
Yeah.
How does he know that? You know?
Oh, I don't know. It's in the article. But he can answer your question on the wealth, because he did. I don't know how he knew that last little tidbit I put in there that he had.
Well, when I came in 1975, Black people owned a lot here. Too bad he wasn't around to do that then. They had houses on the lake.
Yeah,
They had houses on the lake and all of that stuff. So
I know
what
it, but I don't.
to the wealth?
I think that the wealth differential would have been more or less not too dissimilar to what he said for 3 years ago.
I don't think so.
We own all, but sister, we own more housing in '75 than we
That's
do
right.
now.
That's right. That's why I'm saying that the wealth
now is 71.
Right.
But if people would have compared the wealth differential of the average white household in Seattle, Black, it would have been vast. It might not have been 18 times different as it is.
Right.
So
okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
But this is again, where we misconstrue history.
Okay.
That's
So
right.
you have this civil war between the North and the South.
That's right.
The lie would be that the North was there to free the slaves. No.
Yeah,
Right.
No.
Mm-mm.
And the lie would be that there was a Northern tilt toward equality for people of color. Wrong.
No, not
true.
the Negro.
And so, being a Southerner, we lived under de facto discrimination by the fact. But in the North, it was de jure by the process, by the social norms. Here in the state of Washington, there are a number of cases where people of color passed the bar exam and they said, no, you ain't gonna be a lawyer up in here. It ain't gonna happen. And if you became a lawyer, you weren't gonna be downtown or any place else in commerce. Yeah. Sometimes people ask me or say, oh, you're from the South. And when I am at my most lucid, I say, what do you mean the South? You mean south of the Canadian border?
Yeah, that's what Malcolm X said.
That's what Malcolm said.
And actually, as I learn more about Canada, it's like, do you mean south of the Yukon?
You're going way up there.
I mean, serious business, because let's face it, this thing called racism, right, is not, especially European-based racism in North America, I would say has no northern boundary, except like I said, where maybe polar bears and those that aren't people are living.
I just want to talk, I
thank
want to
you.
just say 2 minutes here about wealth is because after slavery, they were determined they weren't going to give black people jobs. So they
Intergenerational wealth.
and because they brought the Italians in to get the jobs. You ever wonder why Italians got to Louisiana? Because they were imported to get jobs. So we have to go back to understand that at every juncture, and that's why they opened the borders. They opened the borders widely after Martin Luther King was there in Memphis, because the Negro had finally said they wasn't going to work for nothing anymore. They had a right to work with dignity. And then they opened the border again. So at every juncture, David, something else has happened, but it's not because we wasn't working. We were denied the opportunity to work because they brought the Italians, the Irish people came in. All of these people came and they got jobs. I mean, they might have still been discriminated, but they got jobs to make sure that the Negro didn't get a job. And I use the word Negro because that's who we were here. That's who Thurgood Marshall went to the Supreme Court for. Thurgood Marshall went to the Supreme Court for the Negro.
And in this area, wasn't this the Oregon Territory? And as I
Yeah,
recall, the Oregon Territory said no blacks. No.
That's right.
No.
But a black man was the reason why we got this state. George Washington Bush. He was the reason why Washington is a state, and Canada didn't get it, or Portland, Oregon didn't get it. So yeah. So that buttons this up with Washington State history. George Washington Bush.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
the final question will go to our esteemed chair, Gary Burns.
This is a quick one. I just want to say how honored and privileged we are for this entire panel discussion. It's been amazing. And so as someone who is absolutely earnest and eager and probably undereducated, who feels like my heart is in the right place, what would you say that I need to do to, and I'll use my PC words, to get engaged, to fight for equity? Because I believe that I have a place to make a difference. Where would you say I could best apply my efforts?
Well, I think that some of the background in all of our responses, as well as some of the questions, was that the Democratic Party in Seattle and in King County potentially is a very important avenue through which we can build a broad-based political power for Blacks and other disadvantaged citizens in Seattle and Martin Luther King Jr. County. But we need leadership and vision that's not arguing all the time about who got the right way, and are patient with one another, or can do what Alec has consistently tried us to do. How can we have a reconciliation discussion that lays a foundation for things we can do as Democrats, and then move forward and do it? I think we might surprise ourselves as leaders in this community of what we might be able to do. And institutionalized racism and stuff like that is going to be an important part of our race, because we are the fighting D's from the 37th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And before we round up, I just have just like a sentence or two. What's your advice for the present and the future to come? And I will start with Reverend Walden.
Wow, well, my advice is to stay engaged, really and truly. I mean, is to stay engaged and stay at the table. I mean, really and truly, because one thing too is this: America is the only country in the world where everybody, whether you have a home or whether you're voting or not, has 2 representatives and 1 senator, and everybody does. I mean, so it's a unique system, but you have to stay engaged. I mean, really and truly, it's a participatory system, and if you don't participate, and sometimes the Dems go home. I mean, the other folks ain't going home. They ain't been home since 2017, 16, okay? So sometimes the Dems go home and then they come out again. But it is a persistent journey. And the reason why we've made gains in this country is because from the 1920s to the 1980s, Black people didn't go home. They organize all the time, whether it was in the churches or whatever. So it's staying engaged and understanding what system it is. Canada has a different system. They can get rid of a president, call the system in, no confidence, vote him out. Our system is different. So you must stay engaged. I vote for my grandmother and I vote for the Supreme Court. That's why I vote. I vote for a person who's never ever voted because she couldn't vote. And I vote for the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of America. And it takes years to overturn something. So that's why I stay engaged, because now we got work to do because the court is set for the next 40 years.
Thank you so much. And I'll go to Councilmember Gossett.
You go to me about what?
What's your advice for the future and the present?
Well, I mostly said it to our new energetic president, Kerry, and I don't have anything to add about. I'm very confident we can build a united front that involves all of us Democrats in this region, and it can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Alec?
So my favorite anthem actually is Ella's song, and it's basically, we who believe in freedom cannot rest.
With the freedom come.
That's right.
Oh, you know what he was gonna say?
And along with
Well, it's
that,
my
Carrie,
theme song for my radio
the
show.
thing,
It's my
the
theme
thing,
song.
the thing, I was in a workshop with the Democrats, and I said to everybody, just remember this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Oh, yes.
And somebody misunderstood me and said, Alec is preaching patience. And I said, no, Alec is preaching perseverance.
That's right.
That we don't quit, that we don't stop. We don't expect this to all change overnight, but we stay at it.
At the table. That's
and
right.
We never give up.
Give up. Yeah. Yeah, and stay at it. But listen to my mother's Justice Show on 11:50 a.m. KKNW. I'm on every Monday from 2 to 3. Been on 8 years.
K what? KTMW.
No. KKNW. 11:50. Same station that Eddie Rides on. Eddie, I'm on the same station. 11:50 KKNW.
Thank you.
I really want to say thank you so much. It's not just been educative, it's been informative, it's been life-changing. For me as a person, it's giving me nuggets to go back and think about. And you know, as Alec just said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And what can I do to persevere to make sure I'm also part of the change? And not just changing the present and the future, but also transferring the history we have to the next generation, to keep on holding back and saying, this is where we're from, and this is what we went through, and this is what we need to achieve. I thank you so much for you all still being the custodian of our history, our heritage, and our culture in the LD37 in the King County, in Seattle area, and in Washington State. Thank you for your time today. Today's supposed to be like a day of special love and everything, and you all decided to share the special love with the LD. Reverend Walden, Councilmember Gossett, and Alec. I personally, and on behalf of the LD37, we thank you greatly for your time today. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That has been here. And at this time, I'll pass it on to Chair Carrie Vance.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. This has been amazing. And I cannot tell you, like, we're so grateful